let's begin as we have been with prayer that our learning, the fruit of our learning should help to bring home the hostages, protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring a speedy end to this war.
Amen.
So with that, last week we read the Mishnah, and we read a little bit of the Gemara. Now we're going to go into this a bit more. So let's remind ourselves of the Mishnah. If somebody ate and drank in one unconscious state, he's only obliged to bring one chatat. So when did he eat and drink?
This is Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur. Okay. And why is he only chayav one chatat?
He's basically liable for his unconscious state and not for the individual things that he did in that state.
Yeah, but why isn't he chayav for the individual things he did in that state? Don't think too hard. Achal v'shata behelem echad. He's only chayav one chatat. Why is he only chayav one chatat?
They're both considered the same category, the same type of Yisur.
Yeah, because essentially they are the same Yisur. They're the same shem as we call it. They're the same category. And as we mentioned last time, the Chidush of the Mishnah is that despite the fact that the shiurim of eating and drinking don't combine to make a single shiur, but nonetheless, eating and drinking are the same isur, they're the same category of isur. As Rashi explains, Dechad Shmahu. It's one name. Because we learn eating and drinking from a single pasuk. How do we learn eating and drinking? That's that surah in Yom Kippur. What's the source? Does it say in the Torah not to eat and drink on Yom Kippur?
No, it's to afflict yourselves.
So you're supposed to afflict yourselves, and it says, anybody who doesn't afflict oneself on Yom Kippur is chayav karet. Now we're going to do a deep dive into that in this sugya in terms of the source. But the basic answer is what you said, that the achila and shtiya are not two separate categories. There's one category of isur, which is to not afflict yourself. In other words, you have to afflict yourself, and afflicting yourself is understood to mean that you eat and drink. Okay. So somebody ate and did malacha. Chayav shtei chatat. He has to bring two chatat. So when did he eat and do malacha?
Yom Kippur.
And why is he chayav for two chataot?
Because malacha is a separate category. I mean, it says it's
a separate category
than aniya, than afflicting yourself.
Then inui, yes.
Inui, okay, right.
Very good. Achal ochlin shenan ru'uyin la'achila, v'shata mashkin shenan ru'uyin l'shtiyah. I still didn't make the correction. The Bach here adds in the word patur. So if you ate food that's not fit for eating, you drank drinks that are not fit for drinking, then you're patur. V'shatat sira murias patur. Somebody who drinks sira and murias, which are like the brine or the sort of the liquidy stuff that's with fish, then you're exempt because those are things that people don't drink. Okay.
By the way, there is a word for the stuff that goes with fish. It's called garum.
Garum. I think that maybe that's thank you. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. The both I'm not sure if I'm translating it right. I did Sir and Morias are both. Is garum is stuff that comes out naturally, or is it stuff that you do that's there when the fish is preserved?
It's there when the fish is preserved. So it's like a pickle. It's like pickling juice from fish.
I think that's what that is then. I think that's correct. Okay. This last part about Ochlin and Shtiyot and Nashkin, they're not ruyin. We're gonna set that aside for now. The Gemara is gonna talk about the first part of the Mishnah first. So Amar Yesh Lakish. Mibnei ma lo nemra azhara v'inui. So why isn't there an azhara stated for inui? Mishum d'lo efshar, because it's not possible. Hechi nichtov, how would we write it? Nichtov rachmana lo yochal. So let the Torah write, one should not eat. Achila b'kazayit. Achila is measured as a kazayit. Nichtov rachmana lo tu'uneh. Let the Torah just write, don't afflict. Kumechol mashma. So that would indicate to me to get up and eat, that you should dafka eat. So Reish Lakish's problem here is that in general, when the Torah tells us that we're not allowed to do something, and that if we do it, we're chayav some kind of punishment, the Torah introduces that using certain language, and usually like that also in two parts. There's usually there's a pasuk that's an azhara. It says don't do something, and there'll be another pasuk. Sometimes it's in the same pasuk, but another pasuk that tells me if you do it, you get punished. So the Torah, as it were, both warns you before it gives you the punishment. You're not allowed to do something. If you do it, you get punished.
Actually, we saw them in the last two parshiot with Ariot. I mean, Achrei introduces the Ariot, and Kedushin brings the penalties, if I recall.
Very good. So we have it also here. And we'll look at some of the psukim, but I decided for today, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at a summary of some of these concepts from the Rambam. Rambam actually discusses this in a couple of places. Here is one. I didn't bring up the other. Let me see if I can bring it up quickly. Just a second. Okay. Second one, I don't think we're going to get into today, but I'll talk to you a little bit about it. The first one, which is also, this is accessible also online on Al HaTorah website. I think the Al HaTorah website uses a different translation. I'll just explain this for a minute. Until about 50 years ago, unless you knew Judeo-Arabic and had access to some rare copies of the Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah, you would learn the version that was printed in the back of the Vilna Shas, which was translation was done by more than one translator over a period of time, none of whom, or at least most of them, were not particularly learned people in like in Shas and in learning in general, but they were somewhat learned, and they knew Judeo-Arabic, and they did these translations. But there are a lot of problems with these translations. So about 50, 60 years ago, Rav Yosef Kappa, who was originally from Teiman, set about doing a new translation of the Rambam, and he also explains in his introduction that he comes from a line of prominent rabbis in Yemen. His grandfather already, like in the 19th century, set about trying to find the original manuscripts, the autograph manuscripts of the Rambam. In other words, the original manuscripts that the Rambam himself wrote of the Perush Mishnayot. And he managed to get most of them. And the ones he didn't get, the few Masechtas he didn't get, they got very early manuscripts from Teiman. And the Teimanim were particularly noted for their high degree of accuracy in copying, as in other things. They're sort of the Yakis of this part of the world. But they also had a particular love of the Rambam because of the Igeret Teiman that he wrote them to give them support at a time when their community was under threat and they were threatened with either converting to Islam or being executed. And the Rambam told them that they would be allowed to perform, like to pretend that they had converted outwardly, and they could keep things privately. But you get it, that's a very important piece by the Rambam, which I encourage everybody to read. In any event, it's a digression on a digression, but the Rav Kapach then translated the Perush Mishnayot with a lot of notes. In the original edition, which I don't have, it actually has the Judeo-Arabic side by side with his translation, but then it was published in a more popular edition in 3 volumes by Masada Rav Kook. Maybe they also did the other one, but the one that I have, it doesn't have the Judeo-Arabic. In any event, I thought that was going to be like the last word in this translation. But recently, I understand there was a Rav Shelat, I think it's Rav Yitzchak Shelat, who has done new translations. And I haven't researched him. I mean, I think I looked up a little bit about him. He's also phenomenally expert and brings a lot to bear. I don't know what the differences are between his translation, Rav Kapach's translation, but Rav Shelat's translation is available on the Al HaTorah website. And when I've gone back and forth between the two, I haven't noticed a big difference. But I'm also what they have on the website there, it's without his notes, so I don't know. I don't know his whole story. In any event, that's just for your general knowledge about books, which is always important. The Rambam here in the 3rd chapter of Makot gives us somewhat of an introduction to some of these issues that we're going to be talking about in the Gemara here. Our Gemara is in fact a source for some of the some of this discussion. But I'm just gonna start off by reading what he says. We're not gonna read the whole thing, it's kind of long, but I want to read the beginning and then I'll just skim a little bit of the rest. Why does this come here in the beginning of the third chapter of Makot? Because in the third chapter of Makot, it starts to list the Isurim for which one gets Malkot. That's how it begins. That's most of the parak. So here he says, before he starts to explain the Mishnah, he gives an introduction. He says, you have to know the many general rules that I'm going to mention here. Mehem, among them, anybody who is chayav karet alone, or mita bidei shemayim, which is a slightly lower level of punishment, heavenly death in the hands of heaven. And if that chiyuv came about because of something for violating an isur, violating a negative commandment, so if the person who violated that commandment did it in front of witnesses who warned him before he did it that you're not allowed to do what you're doing, and if you do, you will get such and such a punishment. So feg malkot, then he absorbs the lashes, and he gets lashes. Safag malkot, and if he does get the lashes, vesat shuva, and he repents, niftar mina karet, then he will be exempt from karet, which is a heavenly punishment. Karet kulam, meforashim b'Torah. People who are chayav karet, they're all expressed in the Torah. And those people who are chayav mita, that is mita bidei shemayim that he mentioned, mehem mikra mefurash and mehem nirmaz aleim. Some of them are explicit in the Torah, and some are alluded to in the Torah. All of them were already mentioned earlier in Masechet Sanhedrin, which is the Masechet that comes right before Makot, in the 9th and the 11th chapters. Not on this did they say that a person can't be chayav for two judgments, because when he gets malkot, then he no longer has a chiyuv karet or the mita bidei shemayim. I'm not going to go into explaining that, but it means basically that once you get this earthly punishment of malkot, then you no longer have a connection to get a heavenly punishment. This is the part we want to concentrate on. We know that all mitzvot are a commandment and a warning. A tzivui u'mitzvah taseh. When we talk about tzivui, it means a positive commandment. Azhara mitzvah lo taseh. Azhara is another way of talking about negative commandments. V'halashonot shenemra bahen ha'azhara b'torah v'yaleha omrim shemitzvah plonit hi mechelik halavin arba lashonot v'chalek halavin arba lashonot. So the Torah indicates the azhara, that is the negative commandment, using 4 different terms: lo, the al, v'hishamer upen. So when you see these terms, lo, like lo ta'aseh kol melacha, etc., then you understand that the Torah is telling you about an isur love, an isur of a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Amru koma kam shneimar, and the Chazal said, any place where it says hishamer pen va'al, eino ela mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Any place where the Torah uses these terms, pen, al, hishamer, it indicates mitzvah lo ta'aseh. And of course, shalola mar, right? You don't have to say that if the Torah says lo, so the lo is clear. But hishamer, pen, and al are also mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Mitzvot lo ta'aseh elu nechlekin chalukah rishona ba'arba chalakim. So these negative commandments are divided to begin with into four divisions. Some of them are people who, if they're chayav, if they violate the commandment, they're chayav mitat beitin, they're chayav capital punishment from a rabbinic court. Their punishment is explicit in the Torah. Second category, people who are chayav karet, which we talked about a little bit. People who are chayav to get mita bidei shamayim. And we already mentioned that these two categories are people who are chayav malkot. There's a fourth category of people who are called mechuyavei lavin, and it's a separate category, which we'll explain. Those are the ones for which the Torah just said alav. You're not allowed to do it, but didn't tell us that there's a punishment. So some of those are category. Some of that category of the lav are people who get malkot. And there are lavin for which somebody, in other words, you could be over on an isur d'oraita that didn't fall out into the category, the three other categories, and for which you're also not chayav malkot. Even if that person transgressed and did something that was forbidden, they did a forbidden act. Hashem will punish him for his transgression, but with that which is known before him, yitala. We know which ones people get malchus for, which people don't get malchus for, based on what I'm going to explain. All lavin in the Torah are divided into 7 divisions, 7 categories. Mehem shisha ein chayavim behen malchut, v'chelek echad usha chayavim bo malchut. So 6 categories of lavin are people who are not going to be chayav malchut, and there is one category of people who will be chayav malchut. Masha martikan lavin. When I talk about lavin, kavanati bekach ha'azara. Again, it goes back when we talk about lavin here, meaning generally, I'm talking about the azara, which he already explained means a mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Bein shaya be'echad mi'arba lashonot, whether it was expressed in one of 4 languages, which were lo, va'al, pen, v'hishamer, right? O shahaya lav haba michlal aseh, or even if it's a negative commandment that comes by implication from a positive commandment, as will be explained. So, before we go any further, you'll already understand now maybe a little bit more about Reish Lakish's problem. Because the Torah, when it tells us not to eat and drink on Yom Kippur, it doesn't use any of those languages. So he wants to know why, right? So now we understand a little bit better what he's talking about. What did he say? Amar Shakish, mimnei ma lo nemra azhara bi'inui. Why isn't there, in other words, why isn't there a language of azhara, which would be lo, al, pen, hishamer? Why isn't that mentioned by Inui? And so his answer is Mishum Efshar, because you can't, there's no way to do it. How would you write it? Rachmana lo yochal. So if you'll say, let the Torah write, don't eat, achila b'kazayit. Eating is measured with the kazayit. So what's the problem with that? Let the Torah say lo yochal, and then I'll know I can't eat a kazayit on Yom Kippur. What's the problem?
The measure for generally prohibitions on eating is a different shiur than the prohibition of eating as a function of inui.
Okay, that's a lot of words. Make it simple. You're correct, but tell me in simple words, what's the problem with saying that if the Torah had written lo yochal, I would understand that to mean achilah b'kazayit, and that wouldn't be right because
the measure is different for Yom Kippur because it's because I does not bring Yishuv Hadas.
excellent. See, can pull it out. So, in other words, what we have learned so far is that when the Torah tells us kol nefesh shelo tu'ineh, a person who's not right, who doesn't afflict themselves, we learned from that if what would it mean to not afflict yourselves? It would mean to eat enough that you get yishuv hadat. That's how Chazal understood it. So if the Torah would have written lo yochal, I would have understood that the Torah means I'm not allowed to eat a kazayit. And then I wouldn't have gotten the proper intent of the Torah, which is they're not concerned about you eating a kazayit, they're concerned about you getting yishuv hadat. So it wouldn't be accurate. So if I just said lo yochal, then it wouldn't be an accurate way of expressing what the Torah means. Nichtov rachmana lo tzu'uneh. So let the Torah write lo tu'uneh, don't afflict, which is a lashon of isur. Kumechol mashma. What does that imply? Don't afflict. If the Torah says don't afflict yourself on Yom Kippur, that implies that you should get up and eat. Like you should do something to not afflict yourself. This line here in Reish Lakish's question, I find it. I spent some time on this, but it seems so obvious that I really wasn't sure if that's what it meant. But that's what it means. In other words, Reish Lakish's problem is that we don't see this Isur of Achilah and Shtiyah and Yom Kippur being expressed as an Azhara the way virtually every other Isur is expressed. And he wants to know why. So basically his answer is because the Torah there isn't any other way for the Torah to phrase it. Now you might say, so let the Torah say, don't eat enough on Yom Kippur to give yourself Yishuv Hadat. But I think the underlying assumption here is that the Torah uses this kind of language, and the Torah has a kind of consistent way of expressing itself. And this is what the Rambam now has explained to us in the most basic fashion, when the Torah wants to tell us that such and such is asur, it uses this specific language, these four lashonot of lo and al, pen, and yishamen. Those are things that the Torah says. So the Torah doesn't use it here, and Reish Lakish says the reason it doesn't use it here is because this is kind of an exceptional case, and there isn't any other way to express it.
Shel,
Yeah.
the rules of the Rambam, are they all obvious when you read the Torah, or is their origin in the Mishnah itself?
Well, the Rambam is basing himself on the Gemara, and we're actually going to,
on the Gemara. Reish
Yeah.
Lakish didn't read neither the Gemara nor the Rambam.
no, but he didn't read the Gemara. He lived the Gemara. In other words, he was part of the tradition that produced the Gemara. So the Gemara and also the tradition. When I say Gemara, I mean not necessarily, these are things that are not necessarily in the Mishnah, but they are in Tanaitic literature. They go back to the time of the Tanaim, and Reish Lakish was familiar with them, and that's his problem. This is the problem. Reish Lakish understands that the Torah expresses itself in particular ways, and here it doesn't. So he wants to know why, and ultimately he says, "Delo efshar." There's no other way of doing it. But in terms of what the sources from the Rambam, we're going to see some of them, not this week, because this is kind of a long sugya, but the Gemara itself is going to go into some of the details that the Rambam has laid out. So we will see it. We'll see a number of them. In fact, some of them we'll see today. Just a second. I want to go back for a few minutes to the Rambam. I'm sorry to skip around like this, but I want to just go here. I'm going to skim the next parts. So the Rambam has set us up for this idea that there are 6 categories of lavim, for which one is not chayav malkot, and there's one category for which somebody is chayav malkot. And I am going to, I'm not going to read everything that he has to say about them, but I want to give you the headlines. So the chelik harishon mehem lav shenitan la'azarat mitat beit din o la'azarat karet ein lo kin alav. So there's this category that if you have an isur that literally is given over to the isur, an isur that which involves mitat beit din, or an isur that involves karet, ein lo kin alav. So he gives some examples. One of the examples here. Kagana amru lo yikach ish et eshet aviv. I'll give you an example that might be easier to explain. There's an isur, there's the case of the zaken mamre, the elder who rebels. So if you have an elder who's part of the Sanhedrin, he's ra'ui, he has smicha, and he's ra'ui lahora'ah. In other words, he has authorization to paskin, and the Sanhedrin gives a psak about a din which itself involves an isur karet, and the zaken disagrees with that, and he openly defies their opinion, he's chayav mita. And so in other words, there's an isur that involves going against the chachamim, which in a particular case will lead to mitat beit din. So what if you're not a zaken mamre? What if you're just a person who's not ra'ui l'hora'ai, that you don't have smicha, you don't have all of those things, and you also go against the word of the Beit Din, you don't fulfill all of the requirements to be given capital punishment. But what you've done is under this rubric, it's under this general category of the Zaken Mamre. But so what you did is you violated an azhar, a lav shnitan azharat mitat beitin. You violated an isur that is given over to the category of where a warning that would bring about capital punishment exists. But you yourself won't get malkut for having violated it. That's generally what this means. What's the second category? Sheni, lav shenitan letashumin ein lokin alav. If you have an iser which translates or could translate into payment, then you don't get malkut. For example, lo tignohu, lo tasho kedreyecha, lo tigzol, ki timkuru memkar, lo tonu. In other words, there's a bunch of isurim which the Torah tells us you don't steal, you don't oppress, like you don't withhold wages, and you don't rob, etc. Those are also, they're all isurim. But since the Torah tells you that your punishment is to pay, you don't get malkut for those. What's the third category?
Is it fair to say that these are all ben dam lechavaro?
All of what?
This last category,
Or
this last subcategory rather.
Yeah, no, right. I understand what you're saying. I think so, because whenever the Torah is tells you that that you have to pay, that's always a when you did something b'mezid and you pay, that's always going to be ben adam l'chavero. I think you're right. B'chelik hashlishi lav she'en bo ma'aseh. The third category is an iser where there's no action. Kigon lo telech rachil. So that's maybe the most famous one. Whereas rechilut, which is an isur dioraita, you don't get, if you're over on rechilut, you don't get lashes, you don't get malkot, because speech in general, not always, but speech generally is not considered to be an action. So it's a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. It's an isur which has no action. And he gives some other examples. Chelik haravi'i lav shenitak la'aseh, ein lokin alav. This would be an isur that has been transformed, as it were, into a positive commandment, right? Ein lokin alav, elim lo kiyem aseh shabo. You don't get malkut for it unless you did not fulfill the positive commandment. So here, you go on amro yitala lo tikacha ema banim, right? So the mitzvah of kan sipor. If you come across a nest and it has the mother and the eggs or the chicks and so forth, it says don't take the mother from the children, from the offspring. So that's a love. The Torah is saying don't do it. The imavar kacham kulam, and if you did go ahead and take all of the offspring, what does the Torah say? Shalech to shalach et ha'em. Send away the mother. Ze aseh. That's a positive command. So the kol zman shishlach et ha'em eno chayav malkot. So as long as you send away the mother, you won't be chayav malkot. Lefikach eno chayav malkot beid lekichatam yachad. So therefore, you won't be chayav malkot at the time that you take them all together. Because you could send away the mother and be mekayim the aseh. How there is a case which he explains where you could ultimately be chayav malkot. So how would that happen? If you held on to the mother after you took the offspring until the mother died, or somebody else slaughtered her, so that now there's no possibility of sending away the mother, then you would be chayav malkot. But in general, but this is the idea of the lav shnitak la'aseh, where the Torah says, don't do this, do this. So if you do the aseh, or you could do the aseh, that's a lav shnitak la'aseh, and you don't get malkot for that. Lav haba miklal aseh. There's another category. The fifth category is a lav that comes by implication from an aseh. Kagon amro bekohen gadol. So, like, for example, in Parshat Emor, as a matter of fact, by the high priest, v'hu ishabi tulei yikach. The Torah gives us an aseh to the kohen gadol that he has to take a wife in her virginity, right? He has to take a virgin wife. Mashma, so what does that imply? Shasur lo lakachat bu'ula. It implies he's not allowed to take a woman who isn't a virgin. But since the Torah didn't explicitly say he's not allowed to take the be'ula, if he transgressed and went ahead and married a be'ula, eino chayav malkot. Kevan shechayav mishenasa, kamo shechayav mishenasa almana grosha zona b'chalala. He's not like, unlike the kohen who marries, the kohen gadol who marries an almana, or a regular kohen with grosha or zona b'chalala, because there the Torah gave us a specific isur. So, in other words, in the case of the Kohen Gadol, who Isha B'ftulei Yikach, it's a love that came by implication from the Aseh. The Torah implies that there's an isur, but it doesn't tell us explicitly that there's an isur. So there also, there's no malkot. B'chelik hashishi lav shebichlaalot. The sixth category is a lav that comes from general rules. Who lav shelo ne'amar b'feirush. This is a lav that's not said explicitly. Aval milman midvarim acherim, but it's learned from other things. K'moshamrim becoming makom lav b'feirush yitmar. Like it says in a number of places, in other words, the Gemara says, this was not said explicitly, but it's said by implication. V'hu kigon amro, the lechem, v'kali, v'charmel lo tochlu. Also something we read recently in Parshat Kedoshim, right? That you're not allowed to eat bread and like toasted grain and carmel and the fresh grain you're not allowed to eat. Asher yotzei mizeh. What is it? What comes out of it? What's it implying? It implies that you're not allowed to eat new grain. It's the grain from this year's crop until until the time has passed, right? Until Macharat Shabbat. The imachal kali bilvad. So if, let's say, you ate some toasted grain before that time, but when it was hadash and we're still not allowed to eat it, lo nilkehu shte malkiot. We won't give him two sets of malkot. Achat mishum kali, kali lo tocha, v'sheni mishum chadash lo tocha. We won't give him two separate sets of malkot for having violated eating chadash, which is an isur, and having violated eating kali, which sounds like it's a separate isur. Ela malkot achat mishum kali. We only give him malkot once for eating kali, etc. And then finally, chelik hashvi ulav greda. Seventh category is a love by itself. In other words, it's an isur, it's a love that doesn't have any of the six characteristics from the previous categories. Hareza lokina love. For that, you do get malkut. Kagon, hashatnez, vakilayim, vanaveilal, basar b'chalav, v'bektovet ka'aka, v'seret l'nafsho, l'nefesh, v'zulatam rabbi. And right, so there's all these other. So there's a bunch of other ones that don't fit any of those other categories. They're just straight lavin. The Torah says, don't do this. And for those, you get malkot. And he goes on. So, but that's the quick and dirty introduction to this subject. Let's go back now to our Gemara. So, what this sugya is going to be dealing with, beginning with Reish Lakish's point, is different ways that Chachamim understood specifically this issue of not eating and drinking on Yom Kippur, because it's expressed in the Torah in a unique way, because it doesn't say any of these lashonot of lo al pen hishamer, and yet we assume not only are you chayav for eating and drinking on Yom Kippur, but if you do it b'meizid, you're chayav karet. It has all of the other characteristics of an Yisur Lav, for which you're chayav karet, but it doesn't have. But what's missing is in the source. It doesn't seem to have a source in the Torah that would indicate that it would have all of those. That it would have all of these characteristics. The Torah says it says if you're not Muneh on Yom Kippur, then you're chayav karet. It's not that the Torah doesn't say you're not chayav karet. You are chayav karet. But the question is, why didn't the Torah, or so Rosh Lakish approaches it like this, why didn't the Torah express this the way it expresses other azharot, other lavim? So his answer basically is that there isn't really any way to do it. Now, he's going to be challenged. So he's challenged first from Rav Oshia. Matkifla Rav Oshia.
Michelle, sorry, can you switch screens?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. Matkifla Rav Oshia.
It still didn't work. We still have the wrong screen. Yep.
Oh, so
there.
Oh, it just takes time. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Matkifla Rav Oshia. So Rav Oshia attacks what Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, you can't, there's no way for the Torah to write an Azhara in this instance. So he attacks him. He says, Nichtov Rachmana, Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. So it could have said, Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. Guard, in other words, take care, like guard, lest you do not afflict yourself. So it could have used this lashon of Hishamer and pen, and this is one of the sources, by the way, where we see that there's an assumption that Hishamer and pen indicate an azhara. So Rav Oshia says to Reish Lakish, no, Torah could have written it this way. Could have said Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. So the Gemara answers for Reish Lakish, Im kain nefishi lahu lavi. If that would be the case, then there would be too many lavim. There'd be too many isurim. So what does he mean? So nichtav brachman yishamer pen lo tu'uneh. We understand what Rav Oshia's challenge is. He's saying there's a way that the Torah could have phrased it using a standard form for azhara, and it would have, it would have done the job, right? Because it would have told us that what's asur on Yom Kippur is to not be mu'uneh, which is where we learn the idea that achila and shtiyah are asur because they bring yishuv hadat, etc. So the Gemara answers back to Rav Oshia, no, im came, if that's so, if what's so? Michael Schwartz.
Use that language.
If you use that language, nefishi lahu lavi, then there would be too many lavi. Why would there be too many lavim?
Inui, in some sense, in itself implies a restraint. And so you basically have three loving, back Hishamer, and then the Nui.
You're close. You're not complete. You're close. But here, let's see how Rashi explains. Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. So this is how Rav Oshia wants to answer Reish Lakish by saying, no, the Torah could have said Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. And Rashi explains, what would it mean? Hishamer pen tavo lidei lo tu'uneh. Take care lest you come to a state where you will not afflict yourself. That's how you would understand those words. Hishamer pen lo tu'uneh. Gemara says, "In kain nefishi lahu lavi." If that's true, if you were to use that phrasing, there would be too many lavi. Hishamer upen, Rashi says, sheshnehen lo ta'asehen. Each one of them indicates a lo ta'aseh. Va'anan lav echad amrina. And we're saying that there's only one lav. Shema lo ratza laharbot bo lavi. Maybe the Torah didn't want to give us so many lavi. In other words, what Rashi is saying is that if you use a lashon of hishamer pen, each one by itself indicates a lav. So if I use both of them, it indicates that there are two isuri. It's just the mechanics of the way that kind of drasha works. So if I say hishamer or pen by themselves, that would indicate one lav. But if I say hishamer and pen, it indicates that there are two isuri, there are two lavim. And Rashi says Shema, and then you could say to that, okay, let the Torah say Hishamer pen otuneh, and I'll understand that if I'm over, that I'm chayav for two lavim, for both Hishamer and for pen. Rashi says on that, Shema lo ratzah laharbot bo lavi. But maybe the Torah didn't want to give us so many lavi. In other words, by virtue of the fact that the Torah didn't phrase this way, and knowing what we know until now in terms of the din, I would not assume that the Torah would want to give us more than one lav that's associated with inui. So,
Shel,
yes.
that's strange because it seems they say that the negations they accumulate, but usually when you have in language two negations, you get a positive expression. One goes.
Well, first of all,
I know that in Yiddish they use, but they didn't know Yiddish at that time.
no, but see, also, so first of all, it depends on the language, but here, take into account, it's an interest. I think we'll have to talk about this more as we see more in the sugya, but it's an interesting point. Think about it for a moment. Hishamer it sounds like a positive, right? It's a positive. It doesn't say don't. It says hishamer, guard. In other words, guard yourself. But the implication is a negative. When I say hishamer, and we'll see, like an example later on is going to be hishamer benega hatzarat, right? Guard the blight of tzarat. And there, Chazal learn out that it's asur for the mitzorah to remove his nega. Like he's not allowed to physically take it off. We learn it out from Hishamer b'nega hatzarat. So the implication is that it's asur for you to take it off. But the language...
Nevertheless, the Rambam puts all these labs as if they were equivalents. So we say, all that, or this, or this, or this.
They're equivalent, but doesn't mean that the language, in other words, now we can start to talk about a little bit deeper. Why does the Torah have different languages? Some, let's say, lo and al are both negative languages, but pen and hishamer are not necessarily negative. Hishamer is, I would say, definitely not. And pen also seems to be not itself a negative language, but they both imply negatives. So it's not a negative of a negative. First of all, and again, it also depends, that's what I mean, it depends on the language. Here, when I say hishamer pen, you read Hebrew, hishamer pen, what does it say to you? It doesn't mean do it. Hishamer pen would tell you not to do it. That's the plain understanding of the language in the Hebrew. But what the Gemara is saying is inke nefisha l'lulavim, that by the nature of the way we understand the usage of these terms, hishamer and pen, each one indicates a separate love. That's what the Gemara wants to say. Let's go on a little further. So now we have another challenge to Reish Lakish. And again, what was Reish Lakish's contention?
The Torah couldn't express the lav with, you couldn't express an azahara for the lav.
Right, you couldn't express the love of lo tzuneh as an azhara. Right? Ma lo ne'amra azhara bi'inu. Why wasn't there an azhara written by Inui on Yom Kippur? So Matkifa Rabbi Barabai. So Rabbi Barabai says, Nichtov Rachmana Hishamer b'mitzvat Inui. In other words, then I don't have this problem of having Hishamer and pen. I'll just say, guard yourself regarding the mitzvah of Inui. So the Gemara answers to him, in Cain, Hishamer de love, Hishamer de asay, asay. Hishamer of a negative commandment, when Hishamer is used to indicate a negative commandment, then it's a negative, it's something negative, then it's a negative commandment. But if Hishamer is used in conjunction with a positive, with something you should do, then then we understand it to indicate a positive commandment. And this shows you the duality of the lashon of Hishamer, that it doesn't necessarily mean a negative. Let's we'll just add a little bit from Rashi to make it a little clearer. So Rabbi Bar Abai says, let the Torah write, Hishamer b'mitzvat inui. That seems straightforward. That seems to answer Reish Lakish's question. But the Gemara says, no, if you use that language, then I would say as follows, Hishamer de love. And then Rashi now brings this example. Hishamer of a love, kigon, Hishamer benega hatzarat, shelo yikotz beherto. When the Torah says Hishamer benega hatzarat, what's the whole pasuk? Hishamer benega hatzarat, lishmor ma'od v'lasot, kechol asher yiru etchem ha'kohanim ha'avim, kasher tzivitim tishmeru lasot. Right? So be very careful about the nega tzarat. And from there, Chazal learn it means you're not allowed to cut off your baher. You're not allowed to cut off the particular tzarat that's on your skin. Hishamer de asay. So just like I say, Hishamer of a love is a love. What's a Hishamer of an asay? Be careful to do something. That would tell me that I have to do it. So Hishamer de asay is an asay. So if I say Hishamer b'mitzvat inui, Rashi says simply, Hishamer de asay, in this case, what would it be? Hishamer shetitaneh. Be careful to be mitaneh on Yom Kippur. And then I'll say there's a positive commandment to be mitaneh. But there wouldn't be a negative commandment. And then I would lose the negative commandment aspect. That is, what would it mean practically? It would mean that if you ate a shiur on Yom Kippur, you would be over on an asay. You would have violated a positive commandment. But you wouldn't be chayav for a lav. And the Torah wants to tell us that there is a lav here. Just 1 second. Sorry, there is a mosquito, and I have been getting very serious mosquito bites, but I missed them. Anyway, otherwise I try not to kill too many insects. Okay, so
you can always rephrase something you shouldn't do. Well, you can say, do fast or don't eat. It's always possible to turn things around and make mitzvah into al taseh, and the other way around also.
But you see, and essentially this is the sort of the exercise that we're going through here. But the basic problem is that Chazal say that you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yom Kippur. And they say, we learn that because of this language that tells me that v'initem et nafshotechem. Torah says v'initem et nafshotechem. So the question is, how does the Torah get from Yinitim and Nafshatechem, which sounds like here, like
Like
it sounds
do
like
fast, yes.
a positive commandment.
Mm.
And let's say it means to fast.
Mm.
But how do we get from that to the idea that there's an Isur love?
To eat,
How do
yeah.
I get the Azhara that tells me that there's an Isur love instead of just an Aseh? The whole I don't want to say category. The whole example here, our particular subject of Inui Nefesh is unique because in all the other lavin, now we just saw the Rambam gives us the 7 categories about different kinds of lavin, and they're expressed in different ways, and in some of them are by implication, and some of them because they're part of a klal of a larger category that includes them, or whatever. There are all kinds of reasons that maybe you won't get malkot for them, but they followed this general pattern. V'initim and nafshotechem goes out of this pattern. And we're going to get into all the psukim that talk about inui nefesh and malacha, as we'll see, but it's because because of its unique status that the Torah tells us that you have to be me'anen nefesh on the one hand, which sounds like a positive thing that implies a negative thing, it implies not eating. But how does the Torah then turn around and say, it's just like a negative commandment for which you'll be chayav karet and so forth. You'll be chayav this kind of punishment. Let's do a little bit more for tonight, and then we'll leave it. But you'll see we're gonna get more deeply into it. The third attempt to challenge Reish Lakish is from Ravashi. Ravashi, of course, is like the final generation. He's later, he's last generation Amora, and he says, Nichtov al tasur min ha'inui. Right? Do not turn away from the inui. So he says there is a lashon that exists in the Torah elsewhere, which could be applicable here. And the Torah could have said, Al tasur min ha'inui, and that would imply that that's a lashon of azhara. It would imply that this is an isur, a mitzvat lo ta'aseh, but it still preserves the aspect of inui, which tells me and from that will inform the shiur for which I'll be chayav for eating and drinking because of yeshuva dat. The Gemara says kasha, contradiction. In other words, Reish Lakish, Ravashi's reply, as it were, to Reish Lakish, the Gemara doesn't have an answer for that, and at that moment, it means that in theory, to answer Reish Lakish's question, the Torah could have written it this way. It could have said Al Tasur Minayinu. It would fulfill the category that Reish Lakish wants to fulfill of there being an Azhara. But the Torah didn't. Mufta. Torah didn't. So what we're left with is kasha. In other words, the Gemara doesn't have a reply to Ravashi. So it means, in a sense, he's refuted Reish Lakish's contention that it was impossible for the Torah to write this any other way, because it was possible to write it a different way. But the Gemara also doesn't answer why it didn't write it that way, and why it did write it the way it did. For us, for now, that we're gonna leave that. But by way of doing this part of the sugya, we've introduced this question. And this is what I've been trying to express, that, that the whole issue of Inui Nefesh and the way the Torah expresses it is unique. It's a unique way of expressing itself. And that seems to be what's underlying Reish Lakish's question. And then we'll see next week, we're going to pick up from here. Vitana Maiti La Mehacha. The Tana, there's a Tana, in other words, there's a Braita who brings it from here. And then there's a Braita that's going to go in essentially to try to explain the problem of Reish Lakish from a different angle. I'll just read the words, but I'm not going to try to explain them right now. But this is now where we're going to go back and look at specific psukim. Because we have 5 psukim that talk about Inui Nefesh. Yinitem et nafshotechem, v'chol melacha lo tasu. So Torah says, you afflict your souls and also don't do any melacha. Yachol yehei anush al tosefet melacha. It could be that one would be punished for literally additional melacha. What it means here, tosefet melacha, as Rashi explains, it means doing melacha in the tosefet of Yom Kippur. That is, Yom Kippur, this is true of Shabbat and of Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah of being mosif chol al kodesh. This gets into a deeper and different conversation, but in theory, you could say Shabbat is exactly 24 hours or exactly one day. But we don't know exactly when that day begins and when that day ends. And so the Torah also tells us that we should add from Chol onto Kodesh, both at the beginning and at the end. So we start Shabbat before we know it's absolute dark, and we finish Shabbat after we know that it's absolute dark. That's Tosefet. That's the Tosefet Kodesh. So Yachol Yehei Anush al Tosefet Melacha. It could be that one would be punished, that the Torah would punish you for doing Melacha in this time of the Tosefet, the extra parts that we add on to Yom Kippur. Talmud Lamar v'chol hanefesh asher taseh kol melacha be'etzem hayom hazeh is going to be chayav. What's the drasha? Al itzumo shel yom anush karet. One is punished with karet for violating Yom Kippur al itzumo shel yom, on the body of the day, the strength of the day. In other words, the part of the day that is absolutely known to be part of the day, which means not the Tosafot. So, right, it could be that based on this pasuk, maybe the Torah would punish you for doing melacha during the beginning or the end of you've added on to Yom Kippur. But I have another pasuk that says that when you do melacha be'etzem hayom, you're anush karet, meaning you're not anush karet on the tosefet. Anush karet al tosefet melacha. Yachol lo yehei anush karet al tosefet melacha. So it could be that you're not chayav karet. You don't get punished with karet for this tosefet melacha. Lo yehei anush karet al tosefet inui. But what about the inui that you have to do on Yom Kippur? Maybe that you would be punished for at the beginning or at the end. Talmud Lamar, ki kol hanefesh asher lo tu'uneh be'etzem hayom hazeh v'nichbeta. I have a similar pasuk that tells me about inui nefesh, that it's also be'etzem hayom, al itzumo shel yom anush karet, ve'ino anush karet al tosefet inui. So you're only chayav karet for not being me'uneh on etzem hayom, but not on the tosefet. That's just the reading. And remember to bear in mind as we're learning this, the Gemara says Tana Maiti La Mehachi, that is, the Tana brings it from here. Rashi explains Tana Maiti Azhara Bi'inui Mehacha, that this issue that Reish Lakish brought up, that he wants that Reish Lakish says you can't find, that the Torah doesn't express Inui as an Azhara. The Tana brings it from here. The Tana brings it from a different angle, that there is an Azhara in the Torah. So we have to figure out where the Azhara is that's being spoken about, and so forth. In other words, how does this answer the question of where do I know that the Torah does give us a lashon of Azhara? But anyway, so we have a lot to cover. This goes on for a while. I didn't even finish copying it onto my table. You're all welcome to look at it for yourselves online, Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, and you'll see it eventually gets into some of these other Lashonot that the Rambam mentioned and so forth. And this is a kind of a deep dive into this this kind of very basic concept in Midrash Halacha. A lot of it we see illustrated in this sugya, and we've just started. It's just scratching the surface. So I think this is a good place to stop. Any questions, comments? No? Good. Okay. All right. Bezrat Hashem. See you next week.
All right, thank you. Good night.
תודה רבה.
Thanks.